4 high-altitude interceptors dissolved into electric purple ash, and the orbital telemetry registered exactly 0 thermal variance. Impossible physics. Archon Zalera studied the silent holographic projection hovering above the Void Throne's primary console. Down below, the azure wetlands burned without heat. The Coulter Hegemony's invasion fleet had descended in perfect, charcoal-colored geometric formations, yet the local atmosphere offered no kinetic resistance, only silence. A cracked, handheld data slate rested on the pristine metal of her command tier. Recovered from a downed scout drone in the Obsidian Spires, the primitive device displayed the Hegemony's standard managed population assessment. Zalera tapped the edge of her neural core interface twice. She issued the absolute command for total atmospheric saturation. Beside her, subcommanders processed the execution without a single micro-expression. The local species was already failing. Would you have stayed, or would you have run because she didn't run? Across the secondary monitors flickered intercepted subterranean visuals. Deep within the Obsidian Spires, resistance elements had burrowed into the rock. Fleeing. Prey instinct drove them away from the sky. Yet the visual feed captured a solitary human, designated Specialist Kalen, ignoring the tactical displays of his bunker. Instead, he sat in the dim light, meticulously scraping wet mud and native soil spores off his boots into small glass vials. A strange, useless fixation. Zalera cataloged the behavior as extreme psychological deterioration under the weight of the behavioral correction broadcast. The human mind fracturing, a biological failing. Why else would a soldier prioritize dirt over defense? Intercepted audio frequencies painted an equally chaotic picture. The human comms network consisted of fragmented, overlapping bursts. No absolute syntax, no rigid hierarchy. Signal shifter is hooked. A voice-designated Jace crackled through the Void Throne's acoustic dampeners. Yeah, the fungal payload is a bit sticky, just wipe it off. Dr. Alara Thorne replied instantly. The tone carried zero panic. Under the threat of total orbital annihilation, the locals maintained a casual, almost disjointed rhythm. No fear, just erratic noise. Through the holographic display pulsed the heat signatures of the remaining human population. Level 1 behavioral protocols dictated a total surrender within the hour. Yet the thermal tracking began to blink, erratic and unstable. The underground bunkers weren't just shielding them from the light beams. The rock masked a rising, unnatural frequency. Something below the surface was generating a localized resonance pattern. Zalera tapped her interface twice more. She demanded a full-spectrum sweep of the Obsidian Spires. The drone feed of Kalen and his vials vanished in a sudden wash of static. The primitive signal shifters were actually working. They were fracturing the Coulter hive mind coordination frequencies at the atmospheric boundary. The cracked data slate on her console vibrated. The assessment text flickered, replaced briefly by a jagged spike of native code. A localized resistance effort. The prey wasn't just hiding in the dirt. 11 underground sectors illuminated simultaneously across the main tactical projection. Flared the thermal signatures, burning straight through the orbital interference. Not random, not the erratic scattering of panicked animals. Synchronized. Zalera's mandibles locked. From the Obsidian Spires to the buried coastal bunkers, the primitive signal shifters hit maximum resonance. The Void Throne's acoustic dampeners whined under the sudden pressure. Through the Hegemony's pristine neural network tore a violent, screeching feedback loop. The smell of scorched synthetic coolant flooded the bridge. Down in the lower atmosphere, 3 charcoal-colored interceptors listed sideways, dropped their altitude, slammed into the electric purple marshlands without deploying a single counter-thruster. Complete neurological synchronization failure. The override commands the local network rejected instantly, reported Subcommander Vex, his rigid posture fracturing as a tremor ran through his primary limbs. Atmospheric stabilizers offline. A secondary visual feed snapped into focus on the command tier. Deep inside a captured Coulter shuttle, the human-designated Jace sat cross-legged on the deck plating. Meticulously, he picked dry pine needles off the edge of a cracked data slate. A slow, steady breath followed. He connected a fraying copper wire to a salvaged signal shifter. The Void Throne shuddered. Dead alarms shrieked to life. Flickered the primary holographic display, tinting the bridge in harsh, arterial red. Internal atmospheric shields collapsed completely across the flagship's lower decks. They hadn't burrowed to hide. The realization struck Zalara with physical force. Prey instinct did not dictate a retreat into the damp, lightless caverns. Strategic intelligence did. The humans went underground to mask their thermal output while harvesting the azure wetlands' native biology. The sting of the fungal spores hit the back of Zalara's throat, tasting like copper and wet ash. Disperse the payload. Dr. Alara Thorne's voice sliced through the hegemony's encrypted command channel, crystal clear. The native fungi binds directly to their synthetic respiratory filters. Complete neurological collapse in 70 seconds. A wet cough echoed over the open frequency. "Jace, remind me to call my sister," Thorne muttered. The 11-city authorization code transmitted immediately after. Vented through the flagship's breached ventilation shafts came the pressurized soil spores. Organic, chaotic, and completely invisible to standard thermal telemetry. Around Zalara, elite subcommanders collapsed against their data consoles, convulsed their rigid limbs. The horrific behavioral correction databases wiped themselves automatically as the local network fragmented to prevent further cross-contamination. The invincible Armada was suffocating on dirt. A species that restructured around damage indefinitely had just weaponized the very soil the hegemony intended to conquer. There was no mathematical precedent for an enemy that viewed their own planetary biology as a delivery system. Down on the command tier, the cracked data slate rested against the primary console. A thin layer of brown dust coated the shattered glass. The hegemony's managed population assessment no longer occupied the display. Scrolling across the fractured monitor were the Void Throne's failing internal shield coordinates, followed by a blinking prompt for formal withdrawal terms. Zalara placed her four-fingered hand over the pulsing interface. She severed the flagship's atmospheric locks. The massive charcoal vessels drifted dead above the purple marshlands.